I spent 30 years trying to qualify for my family's love. Treating affection like a performance review, I just needed to ace. But when my father tapped his champagne glass at my birthday dinner, he didn't offer a toast. He offered a public disownment, framing my erasure as a moral necessity. He thought he was delivering a eulogy for my reputation. But he forgot one crucial detail. I was holding the microphone, and I had the receipts. The water outside the harbor view room was the color of bruised slate, choppy and cold against the pylons of the Briarcliff Pier. It was perfect. I had spent 6 months curating this evening, down to the thread count of the napkins and the precise temperature of the Sauvignon Blanc. This was not just a 30th birthday party, it was a demarcation line. It was supposed to be the moment where I finally crossed over from the role of the try-hard daughter, the one who was always just a little too loud or a little too ambitious, into the realm of an accepted adult woman. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, smoothing the skirt of my dress. It was a deep emerald green, a color my mother had once told me made me look washed out, but I had worn it anyway. That was my small rebellion. The rest of the night, however, was an offering to them. I checked my watch. It was 6:45 in the evening. The guests would begin arriving in 15 minutes. My mother, Eleanor, drifted into the room like a fog bank. She was wearing a silver gown that cost more than my first car, and her hair was an immovable helmet of blonde lacquer. She paused at the head table, running a critical finger over the centerpiece of white hydrangeas. "These are a bit tall. Julia," she said, not looking at me. "People will have to crane their necks to see the head of the table." I walked over, my heels clicking on the polished hardwood. I wanted everything to be seamless. I measured them. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice light. "They are below eye level when seated." I sat in every chair to check. She hummed, a sound that managed to convey skepticism without forming a word. She adjusted a fork by a fraction of an inch. "I suppose," she said. "It is just that details matter. We have important people coming tonight. It is not just your friends from the city." I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the old anxiety that I was 7 years old again and had forgotten to practice my piano scales. I took a breath. I knew about the important people. My father, Robert, had insisted on adding 12 names to the guest list 2 weeks ago. I had argued, briefly, that I wanted an intimate dinner with my close friends and immediate family. But the argument had died the usual death. My father had simply said that a Henderson event was never just personal, and that was the end of it. So, instead of 30 close friends, there were 60 guests, and among them were people who made no sense for a birthday dinner. I looked at the place cards. Mr. Samuel Klein. He was the family attorney, a man with a handshake like a damp sponge and eyes that never seemed to blink. Next to him was Peter Vance, a commercial banker my father had done business with for 20 years, and across from them sat Graham Sutter, the director of the Halston Family Foundation, a local philanthropic organization my parents had been trying to court for a decade. "Why is Graham Sutter coming?" I asked, gesturing to the card. "I have met him maybe twice. I think he called me Julie both times." My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were cool, blue, and utterly opaque. "He is a significant figure in Briarcliff. Julia, it is networking. You are 30 now. You need to stop thinking about parties as play dates and start thinking about them as positioning. Your father worked very hard to get him here. Positioning. That was the word of the decade. Everything in our house was positioning. The cars we drove, the charities we supported, the way we smiled for the Christmas card. I had spent my 20s building a career in marketing in the city, rising to a senior director role by sheer force of will. Just to prove I understood the concept of positioning as well as they did, I thought tonight was my reward. I thought tonight was their way of acknowledging that I had made it. "I will be charming," I promised. "I will be the perfect hostess." Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just try not to be too loud," she said, "and watch your wine intake. You know how flushed you get." She turned and walked away to greet the catering manager. I stood alone by the table. staring at my own name on the place card. Julia Henderson. I adjusted the card, centering it perfectly. I wanted no mistakes. By 7:30, the room was full. The hum of conversation bounced off the glass walls, mixing with the jazz quartet playing in the corner. The waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted garlic. I moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and compliments. My best friend, Chloe, found me near the bar. She looked stunning in red, a sharp contrast to the muted tones my family preferred. She handed me a glass of sparkling water, knowing I was pacing myself. "Okay," she whispered, leaning in close. "I have a question." "Shoot," I said. "Why does this birthday party look like a board meeting for a merger?" I laughed, but it was a brittle sound. "You noticed the suits?" I asked. Chloe nodded subtly toward the corner table where my father was holding court. He was standing with Attorney Klein and Graham Sutter. They weren't laughing. They were huddled in a tight triangle, heads bowed, speaking in low, serious tones. My father looked intense, his jaw set in a way that usually meant he was closing a deal. "It is weird. Jules," Chloe said, "Klein is looking at you like he is appraising a used car. And who brings their lawyer to a birthday party on a Saturday night?" "My parents, apparently." I said, "They said it is networking." Chloe frowned. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes still fixed on the trio in the corner. "Networking is inviting a client to golf," she said. "Bringing the family attorney and the head of a foundation to your daughter's 30th feels like something else." "Like what?" I asked. "I do not know," she said. "But the vibe is off. Have you talked to Lena?" I looked around for my sister. Lena was 2 years younger than me, the golden child who had never left Briarcliff. She was standing near the terrace doors, talking to our Aunt Sarah. Lena looked pale. She was wearing a pale blue dress that washed her out, and she kept twisting the rings on her left hand. I waved at her, but she didn't wave back. She just stared at me for a second, then looked down at her shoes. "She is probably just stressed," I said, trying to convince myself. "She has been helping Mom with the logistics." I excused myself from Chloe and made my way toward Lena and Aunt Sarah. Sarah was my mother's younger sister, the only person in the family who had ever snuck me candy when I was grounded or hugged me without checking if my clothes were wrinkled first. As I approached, I saw Sarah gripping Lena's arm. They were whispering furiously. "You cannot just let it happen," Sarah was hissing. "It is cruel, Lena. Even for them, I cannot stop it," Lena whispered back, her voice shaking. "If I say anything, they will cut me off too. You know how they are." I stopped 5 feet away. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Hey," I said, stepping into their circle. "Who is getting cut off?" They both jumped. Lena looked like she had seen a ghost. Aunt Sarah's face crumpled, a mask of guilt sliding over her features. She looked at me, her eyes wide and watery. "Julia," Sarah said, her voice high and breathless. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "Thank you," I said slowly. "What were you talking about?" "What is cruel?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked over my shoulder at my father, who was now watching us from across the room. His gaze was heavy, a physical weight. Sarah flinched. "Nothing," Sarah said, too quickly. "Just family drama. Your cousin Mark is having trouble with his mortgage. You know how it is." She was lying. I had known Sarah my entire life, and she was a terrible liar. Her left eyelid fluttered when she wasn't telling the truth. It was fluttering now like a moth trapped in a lantern. "Aunt Sarah," I said, lowering my voice. "You said, it is cruel, even for them. Are you talking about Mom and Dad?" Sarah reached out and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Julia, listen to me," she whispered. "Just, whatever happens tonight, remember that you are strong. You have always been the strong one. You do not need them. Remember that." "What is coming?" I asked, fear finally piercing through my confusion. "Sarah, what do I not know?" She squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, then let go abruptly. "I have to go to the ladies' room," she said. "I am sorry. Julia. She turned and practically ran toward the exit. I looked at Lena. My sister refused to meet my eyes. Lena? I asked. I have to find Mom. Lena mumbled. Happy birthday. Julia. She walked away, leaving me standing alone near the terrace doors. The jazz band struck up a faster tempo, something upbeat and celebratory. But the music sounded distorted to my ears. My heart was hammering against my ribs. You don't need them. That wasn't a birthday wish. That was a warning. I looked across the room. My father caught my eye. He didn't smile. He checked his watch, then tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. The sharp ting-ting-ting cut through the chatter. The room quieted down. The waiter stopped moving. Everyone, please take your seats. My father boomed. His voice was a rich baritone, the voice of a man used to commanding boardrooms. We have a few words to say before dinner is served. I walked to the head table, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. I sat in the center seat, the guest of honor. My mother sat to my left, her face a perfect porcelain mask. My father stood at the podium near the band, holding a microphone. He smiled, but it was the smile he used when he was firing someone, a grimacing baring of teeth that mimicked joy, but conveyed only finality. Welcome, everyone, he began. Thank you for joining us to celebrate Julia's 30th birthday. 30 years. It is a significant milestone, a time for reflection, a time to look at where we have been and where we are going. The guest smiled politely. I saw Chloe watching me from table 4. Her brow furrowed. She sensed it too. The tension was a wire pulled tight across the room. My father paused, looking down at his notes. He took a breath that seemed to suck the air out of the space. We have always tried to run this family with certain values, he said. Integrity, reputation, responsibility. We believe that being a Henderson means something. It means upholding a standard of conduct that reflects well on our legacy. I froze. This was not a birthday toast. This was the preamble to a lecture. I had heard this tone 1,000 times before, usually right before I was punished for getting a B+, or for wearing a skirt that was an inch too short. Sadly, my father continued, his voice dropping to a mournful register. Sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we find ourselves at a crossroads where the path we are on is no longer sustainable. He looked directly at me then. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a cold, hard resolve. Julia, we love you, but we cannot continue to support a lifestyle and a set of choices that stand in direct opposition to everything this family represents. The room went deadly silent. Someone dropped a fork, and the clatter sounded like a gunshot. Therefore, my father said, his voice gaining strength, we are using this occasion, this milestone, to announce a formal separation. Effective immediately, we are disowning Julia from the family trust and severing financial and social ties. This is not a decision we make lightly. It is a decision made out of necessity, due to ongoing disappointment and irreconcilable differences regarding her conduct and financial recklessness. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like toxic smoke. We hope, he added, that this boundary will force the growth that has been so sorely lacking. We wish her the best in her independent future. He lowered the microphone. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The silence was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the bar. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears, a roaring torrent. Humiliation is a hot feeling. It starts in the cheeks and burns its way down. But this wasn't just humiliation. This was an execution. They had invited 60 people, my colleagues, my friends, the town's elite, to watch them slaughter my reputation. They had framed it as a moral intervention, financial recklessness, ongoing disappointment. I looked at my mother. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Attorney Klein, with a smooth, practiced motion. She slid a thick manila folder across the table toward him. It stopped right in front of his plate. I looked at the folder. The tab was labeled in crisp, black type, Julia Henderson, Separation Asset Recovery. It hit me then. The realization was sharp and cold, instantly numbing the heat of the shame. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This wasn't my father losing his temper. The folder, the attorney, the banker, the foundation director. This was a procedure. They weren't just kicking me out. They were closing a file. They had staged this. They had brought witnesses. They needed this to be public. Why? My mind, usually a chaotic storm of emotions when it came to my parents, suddenly went still. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The survival instinct that I had honed over 30 years of walking on eggshells kicked in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt my spine straighten, vertebra by vertebra. I looked at the folder again. Then I looked at the microphone my father had placed back on the stand. My father was walking back toward the table, expecting me to be in tears. He expected me to run out of the room. He expected the scene where the hysterical daughter proves his point by causing a scene. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. The sound made people jump. I walked past my father. He reached out a hand, as if to pat my shoulder, a gesture for the audience. The grieving father comforting the unstable child. I stepped around him. I walked to the microphone stand. I adjusted the height. I gripped the cool metal. I looked out at the room. 60 faces stared back at me. Shock, pity, morbid curiosity. Graham Sutter, the foundation director, was sipping his wine, looking bored. Attorney Klein was opening the folder my mother had slid to him. I turned to the DJ booth in the corner. "Kill the music, please," I said. The jazz stopped abruptly. The silence returned. But this time, it was my silence. I took a deep breath. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let them squirm. I let my parents wonder why I wasn't crying. "I am not going to argue," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded deeper than usual. "I am not going to beg, and I am certainly not going to cry." I looked at my parents. They were sitting at the head table now. My mother's hand was gripping her napkin white-knuckled. My father was frowning. "This was not the script. I just need 2 minutes for clarity," I said, because I think there has been a misunderstanding about the timeline of this moral decision. I reached into my clutch purse. My hand shook slightly, but I hid it behind the podium. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of an email. 3 weeks ago, I said, addressing the room, I received an email. It was a reply all mistake. I do not think the sender realized that when you hit reply all on the family server, it goes to everyone, even the daughter you are planning to ambush. I unfolded the paper. I saw Attorney Klein's head snap up. He stopped opening the folder. The subject line of the email is, "Re 30th birthday, execution and trust trigger deadline." A gasp rippled through the room. Chloe put her hand over her mouth. I read from the paper, Bob, regarding the setup for the party. "We need to ensure the public disownment happens before midnight on the 28th. If she is still in good standing when the clock turns, the Charlotte Wind Trust triggers automatically. We need the estrangement on record to bypass the payout clause. I have drafted the speech to focus on her mental instability. It plays better for the foundation board than the financial reality." I looked up. My father was standing now. His face was a color I had never seen before, a mottled, furious purple. "That is private property," he shouted. "You have no right." I kept reading, raising my voice just enough to override him. "Make sure Klein is there to witness the handover of the separation documents. We need to lock this down before she realizes what she is worth." I lowered the paper. I looked directly at Attorney Klein. He looked sick. He closed the folder my mother had given him and placed his hand over it, as if trying to make it disappear. I looked at Graham Sutter. The bored expression was gone. He was staring at my father with narrowed, calculating eyes. I folded the paper and placed it back in my purse. "So," I said, into the microphone, "you are not disowning me because I am reckless. You are disowning me because I am expensive, and you are doing it tonight because tomorrow it would be too late." I turned to the guests. "Thank you all for coming. The food is excellent, and it is already paid for. Please, stay and eat. I am sure my parents have a lot of explaining to do." and they are going to need the audience. I took the microphone out of the stand and placed it gently on the floor. A distinct thud echoed through the speakers. As for me, I said, looking at my mother one last time, I am done being performed on. I walked off the stage. I walked straight down the center aisle. I didn't look left or right. I could feel the eyes on me, hundreds of them. I could hear my father sputtering, trying to regain control of the room, shouting something about fabrication and mental illness, but the spell was broken. I saw it in their faces as I passed. They weren't looking at a disappointment anymore. They were looking at a crime scene. I pushed through the double doors and out into the cool night air. The valet was waiting. He looked confused to see me leaving so early. My car. Please, I said. He scrambled to the key box. I stood there, staring at the water. The adrenaline was a high-frequency vibration in my blood. I felt tall. I felt terrifying. The valet brought my car around. I got in. I drove calmly out of the parking lot, checking my mirrors, using my turn signal. I drove for 2 miles, until I was well away from the harbor, down a dark stretch of coastal road. Then I pulled over. I put the car in park, and then I fell apart. My hands started shaking so violently I couldn't unbuckle my seatbelt. My teeth chattered. A sound came out of me, a ragged, animal keening that didn't sound human. I curled forward over the steering wheel, gasping for air, clutching my chest. It wasn't weakness, it was the impact. It was the physical realization that the only people in the world who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just spent months planning my destruction. I sat there in the dark, shaking, while the heater hummed and the dashboard clock ticked over. 8:30. I was 30 years old. I was disowned. I was alone. But as the shaking began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard knot in the center of my stomach, I realized one other thing. I was free, and I had the email. I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and pulled back onto the road. The party was over. The war had just begun. I woke up the next morning to the sound of a lawnmower buzzing somewhere down the street. A mundane, suburban noise that felt violently normal compared to the crater my life had become. My apartment was quiet. The dress I had worn the night before, the emerald green silk, was in a heap on the floor by the door, looking like a shed skin. I didn't want to look at my phone. I knew what was waiting for me, but avoidance was a luxury I could no longer afford. I reached for the nightstand. The screen was a wall of notifications. The texts were split into 2 distinct camps. The first camp was small and fierce. Chloe had sent 12 messages, ranging from, "Are you okay?" to, "I am coming over with bagels and a baseball bat." A few close friends from work had sent guarded, supportive notes. The second camp was larger, and it was suffocating. "Julia, I heard what happened. So worried about you. Please get help." That was from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Your mother is devastated. Call her." That was from an uncle. "We are praying for your mental health." That was from a neighbor who played bridge with my mother. My parents had not wasted a single second. While I had been sitting in my car shaking, they had been working the phones. They had spun the narrative before the appetizers were even cleared. To them, my exit wasn't a triumph of truth. It was a psychotic break. I wasn't the victim of a calculated ambush. I was the unstable, ungrateful daughter who had finally snapped, forcing her loving parents to make a heartbreaking decision. I sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around my waist. The nausea from the night before was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp hunger, not for food, but for leverage. I got up and showered. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink, washing away the scent of the expensive perfume I had worn to impress people who viewed me as a liability. I put on jeans and a black sweater. No more positioning. No more trying to be the perfect Henderson daughter. At 10 in the morning, I walked into the office of Mara Klein. A coworker had recommended her months ago for a simple lease review. Describing her as scary smart and allergic to drama, she wasn't related to Samuel Klein, the family attorney who had sat at my birthday dinner like a vulture, which was the first thing I asked her. No relation, thankfully. Mara said, offering me a cup of black coffee. The name is common. The lack of ethics, however, is specific to him. Mara's office was small, cluttered with books, and smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. I told her everything: the toast, the folder, the email I had read aloud, the presence of the banker and the foundation director. When I finished, Mara leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her chin. "Disowning an adult child is mostly theater," she said. "Unless there is a specific legal mechanism involved, like a trust decanting or a conservatorship filing, standing up at a dinner party and saying you are out is legally meaningless. It is just noise." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "But you said Peter Vance was there? The commercial banker?" "Yes," I said, "and Graham Sutter from the Halston Foundation." "That is not theater," Mara said softly. "That is a transaction. You do not bring a banker to a family squabble. You bring a banker when you need to move assets. And you need a witness to prove that the beneficiary was notified of a change in status." She pulled a notepad closer. "And the email mentioned a trust trigger deadline?" "Yes," I said, "midnight on the 28th. That is today." Mara wrote something down, circling it twice. "Julia, wealthy families do not disown children because they are disappointed. They disown them because they are obstructing something. If they are painting you as financially reckless and unstable, they are building a case for incompetence. They want to bypass you." "What do I do?" I asked. "We find out what they are trying to bypass," she said. "I will start pulling public records on the foundation and your father's business filings. You need to look at your own footprint. If they are claiming financial recklessness, they might have manufactured some proof." I left her office with a list of tasks. The first was to run a full credit report on myself. I went to a coffee shop around the corner, opened my laptop, and paid the fee for a comprehensive audit. The report generated in seconds, a spinning wheel turning into a long list of accounts and inquiries. I scrolled past my student loans, which I had paid off myself. I scrolled past my car lease and my 2 credit cards, both paid in full every month. Then I stopped. There was a line item under Closed Accounts, First Republic Bank, Checking/Savings. Opened. February 14, 2018. Closed. August 10, 2020. I stared at the screen. In 2018, I was 24 years old. I banked with Chase. I had never stepped foot inside a First Republic. I clicked on the details. The account had been opened with my social security number. The address listed was my parents' house in Briarcliff. The balance at the time of closing was 0, but the high credit limit listed was $50,000. My stomach dropped. This wasn't identity theft by a stranger. A stranger would have maxed out a credit card and vanished. This was an account opened in my name, used for 2 years to move money, and then quietly shut down. If my parents had been funneling money through an account in my name, and then that money disappeared, that was the recklessness they were talking about. They hadn't just accused me of being bad with money. They had created a paper trail to prove it. I slammed the laptop shut. I needed my personal documents, my passport, my birth certificate, the hard copies of my old tax returns. I had left them in the safe in my childhood bedroom, thinking they were secure. I got in my car and drove to Briarcliff. The drive usually took 40 minutes. I made it in 30. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the house I had grown up in, the first thing I saw was the truck. It was a white box truck, unmarked. 2 men in blue coveralls were hauling boxes out of the front door. I parked behind the truck, blocking it in. I got out, leaving the door open. My mother was standing on the porch, holding a clipboard. She looked up as I approached. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a cashmere wrap, looking like a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi. "You cannot be here, Julia," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the motherly affectation she usually wore. "I want my papers," I said, walking up the steps. "My passport, my birth certificate, and I want to know why there is a moving truck here the day after you disowned me." "We are decluttering," she said. "It is a cleansing, and your papers are no longer your concern. We are handling the transition." She stepped in front of the door. blocking my path. She was shorter than me, but in that moment, she felt like a wall of ice. Go home. Julia, you made your scene last night. You got your attention. Now let us handle the cleanup. Cleanup? I asked, my voice rising. Is that what I am? A mess you have to clean up? She didn't answer. She just looked at the movers. Keep loading, she told them. One of the men walked past me carrying a stack of banker's boxes. I glanced at the label on the side. Archive, 2012, nonprofit. That wasn't household clutter. That was business records. I stepped toward the door, but my mother didn't budge. If you try to enter, I will call the police, she said. I will tell them you are trespassing and that you are in a manic state. Given the texts we have sent to the family this morning, they will believe me. I stopped. She was right. She had already primed the audience. Any aggression from me would just confirm their story. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I searched for any trace of the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes. The woman who had sat by my bed when I had the flu. I saw nothing. I saw a project manager dealing with a rogue employee. Fine, I said. I turned around. I walked back to my car. I didn't look back. I reversed out of the driveway. My hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They were destroying evidence. They were scrubbing the house, and I was locked out. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. 5 seconds later, it pinged with a text. Julia, it is Elliot Draper. Please do not ignore this. I am at the diner on Route 9. I have something that belongs to you. Elliot Draper. He was an old friend of my father's, a man who had always been on the periphery of our lives. He came to the barbecues. He sent Christmas cards. He was a quiet, sad-eyed man who worked in commercial real estate. I hesitated. It could be a trap, another ambush, but I remembered the way Aunt Sarah had looked the night before. Loyalty and guilt. Maybe Elliot was feeling the same split. I turned the car around and headed toward Route 9. I found him in a booth at the back of the diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, and he had the gray, pasty complexion of a man who hadn't slept. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just nodded and slid a small brass key across the Formica table. What is this? I asked, sitting down without taking off my coat. Storage Unit 404, he said, at the U-Store it on the edge of town. I looked at the key. Why are you giving me this, Elliot? He looked out the window, watching the traffic go by. Because I was there last night, he said. I saw your face when you read that email. I saw Bob's face. He took a sip of coffee. Your father asked me to hold this key for him 5 years ago. He said it was for overflow business files. He put it in my name so it would not show up on his asset disclosures. I never asked questions. That was my mistake, or maybe my cowardice. He looked back at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. I heard the narrative they are spinning this morning. Julia, that you are unstable, that you are dangerous. And, I asked, and I know your father. He said, he does not destroy people because they are crazy. He destroys them because they are in his way. He tapped the key with his index finger. They are not trying to punish you. Julia, punishing you is just a bonus. They are trying to preempt you. Preempt me from what? Go to the unit, he said. I think the answer is in the boxes. And Julia? I paused as I stood up. Be careful. If Graham Sutter is involved, this is not just about family money. It is about something much older. I took the key. The storage facility was a depressing grid of corrugated metal doors behind a chain-link fence. The wind rattled the loose siding as I walked down the aisle to Unit 404. I unlocked the padlock and rolled the door up. The air that hit me was stale and dry, smelling of cardboard and dust. The unit was small, only 5 by 10 feet. It was stacked to the ceiling with white banker's boxes. I pulled down the first box. It was heavy. I ripped off the lid. Inside were accounting ledgers, old ones, spiral-bound notebooks with handwritten entries dating back to the late 90s. I pulled down another box. This one was full of stationery. Halston Family Foundation. I sat on the cold concrete floor and started digging. I found invoices for consulting services paid to companies I had never heard of. I found emails printed out and filed away. And then, at the bottom of a box marked legal, permanent, I found a large manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, which seemed melodramatic until I saw the stamp across the front. Henderson, confidential. I tore it open. Inside were photocopies of a legal trust. I scanned the first page. The Charlotte Wynne Testamentary Trust. Charlotte Wynne, my father's great-aunt. She had died when I was a baby. I vaguely remembered hearing her name mentioned as the source of the family's old money, but the details had always been vague. I flipped to the distribution clauses. Upon the beneficiary, Julia Marie Henderson, reaching the age of 30. My heart hammered against my ribs. The principal of the trust, along with all accrued interest, shall transfer fully to her control, provided she is mentally competent, not under conservatorship, and has not been legally estranged from the family line for a period of more than 12 months prior to the distribution date. I froze. Legally estranged. I read the subsection. Estrangement shall be defined as a formal, documented separation of relations initiated by the guardians due to the beneficiary's conduct, moral turpitude, or instability. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a force that made me dizzy. My birthday, the party, the attorney, the moral framing of the toast. They weren't just being cruel, they were fulfilling a legal requirement. If I turned 30 and was a normal, accepted member of the family, I got the trust. I didn't know how much was in it, but given the lengths they were going to, it had to be millions. But if they could prove that I was estranged due to my own instability before the clock struck midnight on my 30th birthday, they could trigger a disqualification clause. That was why they needed the audience. That was why they needed the witnesses. They needed a room full of people to testify that Julia Henderson was erratic, ungrateful, and cut off by her heartbreakingly principled parents. They weren't disowning me to get rid of me. They were disowning me to keep the money. And the account in my name, the one with the $50,000 limit, that was probably the allowance they would claim I had squandered, proof of my recklessness. I sat there in the dust, holding the document that explained my entire life, every criticism, every time they told me I wasn't good enough, every time they managed my decisions. It was all leading to this. They had to make me the villain of my own story so they could rob me blind. I looked at the date on the trust document. It was signed 29 years ago. They had known. They had known since I was in diapers that this day was coming. A wave of pure, white-hot rage washed over me. It was clarifying. It burned away the sadness. It burned away the lingering desire for their approval. I looked at the documents spread out on the concrete. I had enough here to cause a scandal. I could take photos of these pages, upload them to social media, and burn their reputation to the ground by dinner time. I could scream the truth from the rooftops. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the camera app. Then I stopped. If I went public now, it would be messy. It would be my word against theirs. They would claim the documents were forged, or that I had stolen them. They would lean into the unstable narrative. Look at her. They would say, she is lashing out with conspiracy theories. No, I didn't want a shouting match. I wanted a verdict. I needed more than just these papers. I needed to know where the money had gone. I needed to know why Graham Sutter was involved. I needed to know the full extent of the lie. I chose restraint. It wasn't mercy. It was the patience of a hunter setting a trap. I put the phone down. I carefully organized the papers back into the envelope. I would take everything. I would give it all to Mara. We would build a case so airtight that not even my father's expensive suit could slip through it. I reached into the box one last time, checking to make sure I hadn't missed anything. My fingers brushed against a glossy surface. I pulled it out. It was a photograph. An 8x10 glossy. It was me. I must have been 6 or 7 years old. I was wearing a frilly white dress, standing in a garden, standing next to me, his hand resting heavily on my small shoulder, was Graham Sutter. He looked younger, his hair less gray, but the arrogant tilt of his head was the same. In the photo, he was smiling down at me, But it wasn't a kind smile. It was possessive. I turned the photo over. There was writing on the back in my father's distinctive, jagged script, "Keep her presentable. She is the key." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold storage unit. She is the key. I wasn't a daughter. I was a vault. And they had just tried to change the combination. I stood up, clutching the photo and the envelope. I grabbed the box of ledgers. I walked out of the unit and rolled the door down. I snapped the padlock shut. The wind bit at my face. But I didn't feel it. I walked to my car, threw the box in the passenger seat, and got in. I looked at the photo one last time before tossing it onto the pile of evidence. They wanted a fight about reputation? Fine. I started the engine. I was going to give them a war about truth. The conference table in Mara Klein's office had disappeared beneath a sea of paper. It had been 72 hours since the birthday dinner, and my life had been reduced to 3 piles: verified lies, suspected crimes, and the unknown. Mara and I had spent the last 2 days reconstructing a timeline of my childhood, overlaying it with the financial records I had scavenged from the storage unit. It was a forensic audit of my own upbringing. We found the first pattern around 2 in the afternoon on Tuesday. "Look at this," Mara said, sliding a foundation expense report from 2012 next to a bank statement from the Shell account I had discovered. I leaned in. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, but the numbers were sharp. In March of 2012, the Halston Family Foundation paid $40,000 to a vendor called Civic Strategy Partners for consulting on youth outreach. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "That sounds like standard nonprofit fluff." "Now look at the date," Mara said. "March 14th. I looked at the calendar on my phone, scrolling back years in my head. March 14th, 2012. I whispered. I was 22. That was the spring I got accepted into the unpaid internship in DRC. I asked my parents for help with the rent, just enough to cover a studio apartment for 3 months. "And?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer, and they told me money was tight. I said, the memory tasting like ash in my mouth. They gave me a lecture on fiscal responsibility. My father said, "We cannot just manufacture liquidity. Julia, we are asset-rich, but cash-poor right now." I stared at the ledger. On the same day, they told me they couldn't spare $1,500 for rent. They had moved $40,000 to a consulting firm that didn't seem to exist. We kept digging. The pattern repeated itself like a sickening drumbeat. When I needed braces in middle school, money is tight. We have to wait until next fiscal year. The foundation moved $12,000 to a logistics vendor that same week, when I wanted to go to the state music competition. We just do not have the budget for travel. Julia, a $5,000 check cleared for office renovations to a contractor with a P&O box address. It wasn't just greed, it was containment. They were siphoning money out of the foundation, money that I now suspected belonged to the trust, and routing it into their own pockets while intentionally keeping me on a financial leash. They needed me to feel dependent. They needed me to feel like a burden. If I had known there was money, I might have asked questions, but by pleading poverty, they made me feel guilty for even asking. Mara sat back, rubbing her temples. "This is embezzlement, Julia," she said quietly. "But it is clever. They used consulting fees because they are hard to disprove. You can always claim someone consulted. Proving they did not is trying to prove a negative." "We need to prove the vendors are fake," I said. "We need more than that," Mara said. "We need to know why Graham Sutter allowed it. He is the director. He signs the checks. Why would he let your parents loot his foundation?" "Because they have something on him," I said, "or he is getting a cut." I picked up the phone. "I'm calling him." Mara looked alarmed. "Julia, he is not going to talk to you. I am not asking for a confession." I said, "I am just shaking the tree." I dialed the main number for the Halston Family Foundation. It rang 4 times before a receptionist picked up. Her voice was bright, professional, and completely unaware that she was working for a crime syndicate. Halston Family Foundation. "How may I direct your call?" "Hi, this is Julia Henderson," I said, keeping my voice breezy. I am returning a call regarding the beneficiary compliance review. I believe it was scheduled for last week, but with the birthday chaos, wires got crossed. There was a pause. The typing of a keyboard. Oh, one moment. Ms. Henderson, the receptionist said. Let me pull up the file. Yes, I see the note here. The review was flagged for the 29th? My heart skipped a beat. The 29th? The day after my birthday. Right, I said. The 29th? Is Graham available to discuss the results? Actually, the file says the review was canceled? The receptionist sounded confused. It says preemptive disqualification achieved. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. Preemptive disqualification. I repeated. Yes, she said. I can put you through to Mr. Sutter's executive assistant if you need clarification. Please, I said. The line clicked. A hold music track of generic classical strings began to play. I put the phone on speaker so Mara could hear. Preemptive disqualification, Mara whispered, writing the phrase down and underlining it. That is the legal term for what they did at the dinner. They didn't just disown you socially. They filed paperwork to say the condition of the trust, you being a family member in good standing, was void before the deadline. The line clicked again. This time, the voice was not the friendly receptionist. It was Graham Sutter's executive assistant, a woman named Patricia who had guarded his door for 20 years. Ms. Henderson, Patricia said. Her tone was sharp, clipped. Mr. Sutter is in meetings all day. Patricia, I said, I just need 5 minutes. Mr. Sutter has nothing to say to you, Patricia said. And frankly, after the display you put on at the dinner, I am surprised you have the audacity to call. The board is aware of your situation. My situation? I asked. Your estrangement, she said. We have the filing on record. Please do not call this office again. She hung up. I looked at Mara. She confirmed it. I said, they filed it. Estrangement on record. Mara nodded slowly. They are treating your life like a compliance checkbox, she said, but they made a mistake. What? They filed it after the dinner, Mara said, but for the trust to be void, the estrangement usually has to be established for a set period of time. You cannot just scream, I hate you, at 11:59, and claim estrangement at midnight, unless, I said, realizing the horror of it, unless they have documentation that says I have been estranged for a long time. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a text. It was a call. The screen said, Lena. I stared at it. My sister hadn't spoken to me since she walked away from me at the party. Answer it, Mara said. Put it on speaker. Record it. I tapped the screen. Hello? Lena? Julia. Lena's voice cracked through the speaker. It was high, brittle, and vibrating with a mix of fury and terror. What are you doing? I am sitting in a lawyer's office. Lena, I said calmly. What are you doing? You are ruining everything, she shouted. I could hear her pacing. Her breath was coming in short, jagged gasps. Mom is a wreck. Dad is on the phone with the bank trying to stop them from freezing the credit lines. Do you have any idea what you have done? I think I have a pretty clear idea. I said, I exposed a fraud. It is not fraud, Lena screamed. It is complicated. You always do this. Julia, you always have to be the victim. You have to make everything about you. Why couldn't you just leave it alone? Why did you have to steal those boxes? I didn't steal them. I said, Elliot gave me the key. He is a traitor. Lena spat. And so are you. They loved you. Julia, they gave you everything, and you humiliate them like this? For what? For money? I listened to her words. They didn't sound like Lena. Lena was passive. Lena was the peacekeeper. These words were specific. Credit lines. Traitor. Victim. Lena, I said, cutting through her tirade. Is Dad in the room with you? There was a silence, a hesitation that lasted 2 seconds too long. No, she said. You are lying, I said gently. I can hear the echo. Tell him that if he wants to threaten me, he should do it himself. He shouldn't hide behind his youngest daughter. I am not hiding, Lena shouted. but the conviction was gone. Her voice wobbled. "Julia, please, you have to stop. You do not understand what is at stake. Tell me then." I said, "What is at stake?" "Everything," she whispered. "Just bring the boxes back. Apologize. Say you were drunk. Say you were off your meds. They can fix it if you just recant." "Recant," I said. "That is a lawyer's word." "Lena, just do it," she cried. "Before it is too late." The line went dead. I looked at Mara. She had stopped writing. "She is scared," Mara said. "She is terrified." I agreed, but not of me. She is scared of them. I checked the time. It was 4 o'clock. "I have to go," I said, standing up. "Where?" Mara asked. "You are not going to see them." "Not them," I said. "My grandmother's recipe book." Mara looked at me like I had lost my mind. "The recipe book? It is in the hutch in the dining room." I said, "It is the only thing in that house that actually matters to me. It has my grandmother's handwriting in it. If they are cleansing the house, they will throw it out just to spite me." "Julia, this is dangerous," Mara warned. "I am not going to the house." I said, "I am going to the brunch." "The brunch?" "Aunt Sarah hosts a brunch every Wednesday," I explained, "for the extended family. My parents never go because it is too low-brow, but my Uncle Marcus goes, and Uncle Marcus has a key to my parents' house because he watches the dog when they travel." I grabbed my coat. "I am going to get that key." The brunch was held at a bistro in downtown Briarcliff, a place with checkered tablecloths and aggressive air conditioning. When I walked in, the conversation didn't just stop. It died. There were 12 people at the long table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I had spent every Thanksgiving with for 30 years. When they saw me, the reaction was physical. Aunt Sarah looked down at her salad. Cousin Mark stared at the ceiling. It was like I was radioactive. They had all received the text messages. They all knew the narrative. Julia is unstable. Julia is dangerous. I didn't apologize. I walked straight to the end of the table where Uncle Marcus sat. Marcus was the black sheep of the older generation. He was a retired history teacher who drove a beat-up Volvo and refused to join the country club. He had always liked me, mostly because I was the only other person in the family who read books for pleasure. "Hi, Uncle Marcus," I said. He looked up. His face was lined and weary, but his eyes were kind. "Julia," he said, "you have got guts. I will give you that. I am not here to cause a scene." I said, pitching my voice so the rest of the table could hear, "I just want Nana's recipe book. Mom is throwing things out. I do not want it to get lost." Aunt Sarah made a small, choked noise, but she didn't look up. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a key. He pulled out a napkin. He slid it across the table. "I do not have the key." "Julia," he said softly, "your father asked for it back this morning. Said they were changing the locks." I felt a surge of disappointment, but Marcus kept his hand on the napkin. "But," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur, "if you are looking for things that were thrown out, you might want to look at history." He tapped the napkin. I looked down. Scrawled in blue ballpoint pen were 6 words. "Ask about the notarization in 2008. I looked up at him. 2008? I asked. Marcus picked up his fork. "I was there." He said to his eggs, "At the barbecue. You were 12. You were playing soccer in the yard. You didn't sign anything that day." "Julia, I remember." He took a bite of food. "Go on," he said. "Get out of here." Before the wolves come, I took the napkin and left. An hour later, I was at the county recorder's office. Mara met me there. She had used her bar card to get us expedited access to the archives. 2008, I said to the clerk. "I am looking for any notarized documents filed under the name Henderson involving a minor." The clerk, a bored woman named Gladys, pointed us to a computer terminal. We searched. Nothing came up under my name directly. Try the trust name. Mara suggested, "Charlotte Wynne." I typed it in. 1 hit. Document type. Waiver of interest / voluntary decline of beneficiary status. Filed September 12, 2008. I clicked on the image. It was a scanned PDF. The document was dense, full of legalese, but the header was clear. I, Julia Marie Henderson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby voluntarily decline and waive all future rights, claims, and interests in the Charlotte Wynne Testamentary Trust, in favor of the secondary beneficiary, the Halston Family Foundation. I stared at it. I was 12. I said. My voice sounded hollow in the quiet room. I was in 7th grade. I was worrying about pre-algebra and whether Jason Miller liked me. I didn't waive my rights to a trust fund. Scroll down to the signature, Mara said. Her voice was tight. I scrolled. There, on the signature line, was a signature. Julia M. Henderson. It was written in cursive, looping, elegant cursive. I looked at it. That is not my handwriting, I said. Mara pointed to the bottom of the page. Look at the notary stamp. Notary Public. Elias J. Thorne. Commission expires. June 2010. Mara pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. Elias Thorne, she muttered. Elias Thorne. Got it. She looked up, her eyes wide. He lost his notary license in 2006. She said, 2 years before this document was signed. He was disbarred for fraud. He was stamping documents for cash out of the back of a dry cleaner's. I looked back at the screen. So it is fake, I said. It is worse than fake. Mara said, it is a clumsily executed felony. They forged a minor's signature on a legal waiver, notarized it with a void stamp, and filed it in county records to create a dormant estrangement that they could activate whenever they wanted. She looked at me. They didn't just resent you, Julia. They erased you. They decided when you were 12 years old that you were never going to see a dime of that money. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I expected to feel hot anger again, or the shaking grief I had felt in the car. But I didn't. I felt cold. I felt clear. It wasn't personal. That was the revelation. My parents didn't hate me because I was unlovable. They didn't critique my clothes and my career and my friends because they wanted me to be better. They did it to manage the asset. If I was insecure, I was controllable. If I was desperate for their approval, I wouldn't look at the paperwork. They had engineered my entire personality, my anxiety, my perfectionism, my constant feeling of not being enough, to protect their theft. I am not the problem, I said softly. No, Mara said. You are the victim of a long con. I need to prove the signature is fake. I said, legally, we need a handwriting sample from 2008. Mara said, I pulled out my phone. Chloe. I said, I dialed my best friend. She answered on the first ring. I am on my way to your place. She said immediately, I have wine. I need something else. I said, Chloe, your mom is a pack rat, right? The biggest? Chloe agreed. Does she still have the boxes from our middle school years? The permission slips? The yearbooks? The notes we used to pass in class? Yeah, they are in her attic. Why? I need you to find anything with my signature on it from 7th grade. I said. 40 minutes later, Mara and I were sitting in Chloe's living room. Chloe's mother had produced a dusty bin labeled School Memories. We found it, an emergency contact form for the soccer team, dated September 2008. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Julia Henderson. It was bubbly. The I was dotted with a small, open circle. The J was blocky. It was the handwriting of a 12-year-old girl. Mara placed the photo of the legal document next to the soccer form. The difference was laughable. The legal document showed the sharp, jagged signature of an adult trying to look formal. The soccer form showed a child. This is the smoking gun. Mara said, we have the forgery. We have the motive. We have the fraudulent notary. She looked closer at the legal document. Look at the prepared by stamp in the corner. I squinted. Law Offices of Samuel Klein Associates. Samuel Klein, the attorney at the birthday dinner. He has been in on it for 20 years. I said, he drafted the fake waiver. He didn't just draft it. Mara said, he filed it. He is not just their lawyer. Julia, he is their accomplice. My phone buzzed again. It was Lena. Again. I didn't answer. I stood up. I need to see her. I said, Lena? Mara asked. She knows. I said, she called me a traitor. She said, credit lines. She knows too much. I drove to Lena's apartment. It was a sterile, modern condo in a building my father owned. Lena paid rent, but I suspected the money just circled back into the family accounts. I buzzed the intercom. She didn't answer. I buzzed again. And again. Finally. Her voice came through, tinny and exhausted. Go away. Julia, I have the waiver. Lena, I said into the speaker. The one from 2008. The one where I supposedly signed away my rights when I was 12. Silence. I know it is a forgery. I said, I know Klein wrote it. I know Dad filed it. The buzzer buzzed. The door unlocked. I went up to the 3rd floor. Lena was standing in her doorway. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair unwashed. She was wearing sweatpants, which was something I had never seen her do in public. She stepped back to let me in. The apartment was dark. The blinds were drawn. You found the file, she said dully. I found the lie. I corrected. I sat down on her beige sofa. She stayed standing, hugging her arms around herself. Did you know? I asked. Not everything. She whispered. I knew there was a plan. I knew the foundation was the priority. The priority? I asked. Lena, they forged my signature. They stole my inheritance. They didn't steal it, Lena snapped. A flash of her parents' defensive anger surfacing. They protected it. You know how you are, Julia. You are impulsive. You would have spent it. You would have given it away. The foundation does good work. Dad built that reputation from nothing. Dad built it on a lie. I said, and you know it. Lena crumbled. She sank onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. It doesn't matter, she sobbed. It is too late. They have already moved the assets. They have already destroyed the records. If you go public, they will destroy you. They have a file on you. Julia, every mistake you ever made, every therapy session bill, they will paint you as a lunatic. Let them try. I said, I have the notary. Lena looked up. Her face was streaked with mascara. You do not understand, she whispered. It is not just the money. It is the people involved. Graham Sutter, Klein, the people on the board. If you pull this thread, Julia, you do not know who else gets hurt. Who? I asked. Who else gets hurt? Me, she whispered. I stared at her. What did you do? Lena? She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. I signed things too, she mumbled. I didn't read them. I just signed. Mom said it was for the family. I felt a wave of nausea. They hadn't just used me as a battery. They had used Lena as a shield. They had made her complicit so she could never turn on them. I stood up and walked over to her. I crouched down. I put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. Lena, I said, you have a choice. You can keep protecting them and go down with them when the indictment comes. Or you can help me. I can't. She sobbed. I can't. I stood up. I am going to finish this. Lena, with or without you. I walked to the door. Julia, she called out. I turned. They are not going to stop, she said. They are planning something for the gala. Be careful. I left. I got back to my car. The night had fallen, turning the parking lot into a landscape of shadows. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel. I felt exhausted. The clarity was still there, but it was heavy now. My phone chimed. Voicemail received. Unknown number. I frowned. I hadn't heard it ring. I pressed play. The voice that filled the car was distorted, low, and familiar. It wasn't my father. It wasn't Klein. Julia, the voice said. You are digging in the right dirt, but you are looking for the wrong bones. I held the phone tighter. You think this is about your father's greed. You think it is about the trust. Those are just the mechanics. There was a pause, a sound of a lighter clicking. You are closer than you think. But you are looking at the wrong villain. Ask yourself why Graham Sutter cares so much about a family he isn't related to. Ask yourself what happened in 1995. The voicemail ended. 1995. I was 5 years old. The voice. It sounded like Elliot Draper, but deeper, sadder. I looked out into the dark. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for the car. I wasn't just fighting my parents anymore. I was fighting history. The voicemail from Elliot Draper had left a static hum in my brain, a low-frequency vibration of warning that followed me through the night. You are looking at the wrong villain. I arranged to meet him at 6 a.m. I chose a location where my parents would never be caught dead. A 24-hour laundromat on the edge of the industrial district. It was fluorescent lit, smelling of detergent and damp fabric, and completely devoid of the social hierarchy that governed Briarcliff. Elliot was already there, sitting on a plastic bench, watching a tumble dryer spin a load of work uniforms. He looked older than he had in the diner. He looked like a man who had been carrying a stone in his pocket for 30 years. I sat down next to him. I didn't say hello. 1995. I said, I was 5. We went to Disney World that year. That is all I remember. Elliot didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the spinning clothes. 1995 was the year Graham Sutter almost went to prison. Elliot said quietly. I waited. He was running a boutique investment firm. Elliot continued. He was leveraged to the hilt. He made a series of bad calls on tech stocks before the boom really took hold. He lost everything, client money, pension funds. He was looking at 20 years for securities fraud. And, I asked, and your father bailed him out. Elliot said. Robert stepped in. He didn't use his own money. Of course, he used family leverage. He pulled strings. He made the debt disappear. He saved Graham's life. I felt the pieces clicking together, locking with the heavy thud of a vault door. So Graham owes him, I said. Elliot finally looked at me. His eyes were watery, filled with a profound fatigue. Graham doesn't just owe him. Julia, your father owns him. When your father pushed for Graham to take over the Halston Family Foundation a few years later, everyone thought it was a charitable act, helping an old friend get back on his feet. But it wasn't charity, it was a placement. Your father needed someone in that chair who could never say no to him. He rubbed his face with his hands. I helped, Elliot whispered. I was the accountant who smoothed out the ledgers in 95. I thought I was helping a friend avoid jail. I didn't realize I was setting up a pipeline for your father to drain the family trust whenever he felt like it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. I am done carrying this, he said. I am retired. I have cancer. Julia, stage 3. I do not have time to be afraid of Robert Henderson anymore. He pressed the drive into my hand. This is the testimony, he said. If you need me to stand up in court and say that your father orchestrated the looting of that foundation, I will do it. But you have to be fast. They are moving the money. I closed my hand over the drive. It was warm from his pocket. Thank you. Elliot, I said. Don't thank me, he said, standing up. Just finish it. I went straight to Mara's office. The sun was just coming up, casting long, gray shadows across the city. We plugged the flash drive into her secure laptop. It wasn't just a testimony. It was a map. Elliot had detailed the mechanics of the scheme. It was simpler and more brutal than we had imagined. They used the foundation's name to secure loans, Mara said, scrolling through the documents. Look at this. Your parents took out personal lines of credit for the house, for the cars, for the lifestyle, and they listed the foundation's assets as collateral. Is that legal? I asked. Absolutely not, Mara said. You cannot pledge nonprofit assets to secure personal debt. It is self-dealing. It is tax fraud. It is everything fraud. She pointed to a column of numbers. But here's the catch. The banks didn't check too closely because the financial statements were audited by, let me guess, a firm Graham Sutter selected? She clicked on a file. Bingo, a small firm in Jersey, probably incompetent or complicit. So they are living on debt, I said, realizing the fragility of their empire. They are not rich. They are just loud. They are drowning. Mara corrected, and the Charlotte Wind Trust, your inheritance, was the only liquidity they had left. When you turned 30, that money was supposed to go to you. If it left their control, the loans would be called, the house of cards would fall. That is why the timeline was so tight. I said, they didn't just want to steal the money. They needed it to plug the holes in the boat. Mara nodded. They are desperate. Julia, and desperate people are dangerous. As if on cue, the receptionist knocked on the door. Courier for Miss Henderson, she said. She handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy. The return address was embossed. The law offices of Samuel Klein Associates. I opened it. It was a formal demand letter. Dear Ms. Henderson, we represent Robert and Eleanor Henderson, as well as the board of the Halston Family Foundation. It has come to our attention that you are in possession of confidential proprietary documents belonging to the foundation, which were unlawfully removed from a secure storage facility on the morning of. I skimmed the legal threats: theft, misappropriation of trade secrets, defamation. Then came the kicker. We demand the immediate return of all materials and a written retraction of the defamatory statements made at the Briarcliff Harbor event. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in immediate litigation seeking damages and a restraining order. They are terrified, Mara said, reading over my shoulder. They are trying to scare you into giving back the evidence before you can use it. I tossed the letter onto the desk. I am not giving them anything. I said, I thought that was the extent of it. I thought they would fight me with paper. I was wrong. I went to my office at noon. I worked as a senior marketing director for a mid-sized tech firm. It was a job I loved, a place where I was defined by my competence, not my lineage. When I walked in, the atmosphere was brittle. My assistant, usually chatty, refused to meet my eyes. Julia, the VP of Human Resources wants to see you, she said, staring at her monitor. Now, I walked to the HR suite. The glass walls felt like a fishbowl. The VP, a woman named Karen who had always praised my performance reviews, was sitting with a man I didn't know. He was wearing a gray suit and had a notepad on his knee. Sit down. Julia, Karen said. Her voice was professional. Chilly. I sat. We received a complaint this morning, Karen said. An anonymous whistleblower complaint regarding your financial conduct. My stomach turned over. My financial conduct? I asked. The complaint alleges that you are currently under investigation for fraud involving a charitable organization, Karen said, and that you have been using company resources, specifically your laptop and email, to facilitate this activity. That is a lie. I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I am not under investigation. I am in a dispute with my family. This is retaliation. The man in the gray suit spoke up. We have also been informed that there may be a criminal indictment pending, he said. Given the nature of our business and our client contracts, we cannot have an employee at the director level associated with financial impropriety. They were suspending me. My parents had reached into the one part of my life that was mine, my career, and they were strangling it. They knew that without a salary, I couldn't pay Mara. They knew that if I lost my job, I would look unstable and financially reckless. Fulfilling their prophecy, it is reputation warfare. I realized they are burning the village to catch the rebel. I looked at Karen. If I provide proof that this is a family dispute and not a criminal matter, will that change the status of this suspension? We need to conduct our own internal review, Karen said. Until then, we have to ask you to surrender your badge and laptop. Paid administrative leave, pending investigation. I stood up. I placed my badge on the desk. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I understand. I said, I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my personal mug and a few photos. I stood on the sidewalk, the city noise washing over me. I felt a cold, hard anger crystallizing in my chest. It was different from the rage I had felt in the storage unit. This was strategic. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. I wouldn't play dirty. I would play lethal. I went back to Mara's office. We are not responding to the cease and desist, I said. putting my box on the floor. And we are not suing my parents. What are we doing? Mara asked. We are going to the board. I said, not Graham Sutter. The full board of directors of the Halston Foundation. I pulled out the organizational chart we had found. There are 8 other members. I said, local business leaders, a retired judge, a doctor. They are reputable people. They probably have no idea what Graham and my father are doing. They think they are running a charity, not a slush fund. We draft a compliance package, Mara said, catching on. Exactly. I said, no accusations, no emotional language. No, my daddy was mean to me. Just documents. I started listing them. Exhibit A, the discrepancy in the consulting fees. Exhibit B, the handwriting analysis of the forged waiver. Exhibit C, the email regarding the trust trigger deadline. Exhibit D, the timeline of loans secured by foundation assets. We send it via courier to every board member's home address. I said, we frame it as a notification of irregularities. We ask them, as fiduciaries, to investigate. If they ignore it, they become liable. Mara said, exactly. I said, we force them to act. We spent the next 6 hours assembling the packages. We bound them in simple black folders, no drama, just facts. I sent the couriers out at 5 o'clock. The next morning, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the phone. I expected silence, or maybe another threat from Klein. Instead, at 10 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID said unknown. I answered. This is Julia. Ms. Henderson. A voice said. It was male, crisp, and accented. British. My name is Simon Vance. I am the lead external auditor for the Halston Family Foundation. My heart hammered. Mr. Vance, I said, I assume you are calling about the package. I am calling because 3 different board members called me at home last night in a panic. He said, they received your notification. And they asked me to look into the transaction numbers you cited, specifically the Civic Strategy Partners payments. He paused. I could hear him taking a breath. I pulled the preliminary records this morning. Ms. Henderson, you are correct. There are significant irregularities. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you. I said, do not thank me yet, he said sharply. His tone wasn't hostile, but it was urgent. You have kicked a hornet's nest. I am an auditor. I deal in numbers. But the people you are exposing, they deal in leverage. What do you mean? I mean that within an hour of me making inquiries this morning, I received a call from your father's attorney, accusing you of fabricating evidence to extort the family. They are already spinning this. They are going to frame you as a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge. They will say you forged the documents. Let them say it. I said, the bank records do not lie. Be careful. Simon Vance said, I am required by law to investigate this now. But investigations take time, and in the meantime, you are very exposed. He hung up. I sat there, processing. The auditor was involved. The board was panicked. The machine was starting to turn. But I needed one more piece. I needed to close the loop on the family. I needed Lena. I hadn't heard from her since I left her apartment, but I knew where she would be. It was Wednesday afternoon. Lena always went to the yoga studio downtown at 2 o'clock. It was her one escape. I waited in the parking lot. When she walked out, carrying her yoga mat, she looked frail. She saw me leaning against my car and stopped. She looked like she wanted to run. Get in the car. Lena, I said softly. I can't be seen with you, she whispered, looking around. Mom said, Mom isn't here. I said, get in the car. She hesitated, then opened the door and slid in. We sat in silence for a moment. The car smelled of the lavender spray she used on her mat. They suspended me from work yesterday. I said. Lena flinched. I heard, she said quietly. Dad said it was because you stole money from the company. I turned to look at her. You know that isn't true, Lena. You know I have never stolen a dime in my life. She picked at the foam of her yoga mat. I signed it. She blurted out, Signed what? The paper. Last week, she started to cry. silent tears tracking down her face. Mom came to my place. She was crying. She said you were going to destroy the family. She said there was a technicality with the trust. And if I didn't sign this document, we would lose the house. We would lose everything. She said it was just a formality to protect the family assets. What was the document? Lena? I asked, keeping my voice very calm. It was an affidavit. She sobbed, stating that I had witnessed your mental decline, that I had seen you being aggressive, and that I consented to the transfer of the Charlotte Wynn funds into the Foundation's general operating account for safekeeping. I closed my eyes. They had made her sign the execution order. They had made my sister the weapon. I didn't read it until after I signed. Lena whispered. I was so scared. Julia, Mom was hysterical. And now? I asked. Now I know, she said. I heard Dad talking to Klein. They weren't talking about protecting the house. They were talking about paying off a margin call in the Caymans. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I am sorry. Julia, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I looked at her. I saw the 28 years of conditioning, the fear, the desperate need to be the good daughter because she had seen what happened to the bad one. I could destroy her. I could take her to court, prove she signed a false affidavit, and ruin her life. It would be easy. It would be revenge. But it wouldn't be justice. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. I am not going to destroy you. Lena, I said. She stared at me. I am not like them. I said, I do not use people as collateral. I squeezed her hand. But I have a boundary, and this is the only one you get. I leaned in. You have to choose. Right now. You can help me tell the truth. You can come to Mara's office and sign a retraction. You can tell the auditor that you were coerced. I paused. Or you can step away. You can stay silent. But if you stay silent, you are on their side. And when the walls fall down, and they are going to fall down. Lena, I will not be able to pull you out of the rubble. I won't destroy you to save me. I said, but I won't let you destroy me to save them. Lena looked at me. She was trembling. If I retract it, Dad will kill me. He won't kill you. I said, he will just be disappointed. And Lena? Yes? His disappointment is not a death sentence. It is just a tantrum. I survived it. You can too. She took a deep breath. She wiped her face. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I will retract it. We drove to Mara's office. Lena cried the whole way, but she signed the affidavit of coercion. We sent it to Simon Vance immediately. An hour later, my phone pinged. It was an email from Simon Vance. Subject: Preliminary audit findings. Confidential. I opened it. Mara and Lena crowded around the screen. Ms. Henderson, based on the documentation provided and our initial review of the ledger entries for the fiscal years 2018 to 2024, we have identified the following. 1. $3.2 million in unauthorized transfers to vendors with no verified business license. 2. $1.5 million in loans secured by restricted endowment assets. 3. A recurring monthly payment of $15,000 to an account linked to S. Klein Consulting. Samuel Klein was getting a cut. Of course he was. The board has voted to convene an emergency session on Friday night. They have suspended Graham Sutter pending the investigation. I looked at the screen. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. The money was still gone. My parents were still free. My reputation was still in tatters at my job. But the silence was broken. The email continued. However, be advised. The board is risk-averse. They will try to settle this quietly to avoid a public scandal. They may offer restitution to silence you. If you want justice, you will need to force them into the light. I looked at Lena. She looked terrified but relieved, like a person who had finally jumped off a cliff and realized they could swim. Friday night, I said, the emergency session. That is the night of the gala. Lena said, the gala? The foundation gala. Lena said, it is their biggest event of the year. Saturday night, but the board always meets for a private dinner the night before. I looked at Mara. They are going to try to bury this before the gala. I said, they want to walk onto that stage on Saturday night and smile for the cameras like nothing happened. I stood up. We are not going to let them settle, I said. How do we stop them? Mara asked. We don't stop them, I said. We let them think they have won. We let them think I am scared. We let them think I am going to take a settlement. I looked at the date on the calendar. Friday was 2 days away. And then, I said, we go to the gala. The silence from the Halston Family Foundation was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a structural collapse. According to Simon Vance, the external auditor, the internal investigation had officially begun. The board members were meeting in closed sessions, reviewing the ledgers, and asking questions that Graham Sutter could no longer suppress. But while the foundation went quiet, my parents went loud. It was a masterclass in reputation management. They didn't attack me publicly, that would have looked petty. Instead, they launched a campaign of weaponized concern. My cousin Mark sent me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook status. Posted on Thursday morning, it was a photo of her and my father standing in their garden, looking weary but stoic, holding hands. The caption read, "Navigating a season of deep family heartbreak. We are leaning on our faith and our community as we pray for healing and clarity. We love our daughter unconditionally, no matter the distance she chooses to place between us. Please respect our privacy as we deal with this difficult personal matter." It was brilliant. It framed them as the wounded, patient saints and me as the erratic. A strange child causing them pain. The calls from relatives started changing tone. They weren't angry anymore. They were pitying. "Julia, honey," an aunt left a voicemail. "We know you are going through a lot. Your mom is so worried about your mental state. Just call her. Let them help you." They were hosting dinners every night. I saw the cars lined up down the driveway on social media feeds. They were immunizing the community against the truth. They were telling their version of the story, the version where I was financially reckless and emotionally volatile, over expensive wine and pot roast, cementing the narrative before the audit findings could leak. I stayed in my apartment. I felt like I was under siege. I had the truth, but they had the microphone. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the gala, there was a knock at my door. I froze. I checked the peephole. It was my mother. She was alone. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of stiff blazers and diamonds. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan and slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She looked smaller than I remembered. She looked exhausted. I debated not answering, but the curiosity, and a lingering, pathetic hope that maybe she had come to apologize, made me unlock the deadbolt. I opened the door. "Hello? Julia," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, letting her enter. She looked around my apartment with a strange expression. It wasn't disdain, exactly. It was more like confusion. She had never been here. She had never seen the life I built without their money. She looked at my secondhand bookshelf, my gallery wall of prints, the rug I had bought on sale. "It is cozy," she said, clutching her purse. "What do you want?" "Mom?" I asked. I didn't offer her a drink. I didn't ask her to sit. She turned to face me. The mask of the grieving mother slipped back into place, but the edges were fraying. "We want this to end. Julia," she said. "This fighting, it is killing your father. His blood pressure is through the roof. I am not the one fighting." I said, "I am the one investigating. There is a difference." She winced at the word investigating. "Julia, please," she said, "you are making a mistake. You are listening to people who do not understand our family. People like that auditor. They do not know how complicated things are. They look at numbers and they see crime, but they do not see the context." "Context?" I asked. "The context where you forged my signature when I was 12? She waved her hand dismissively, as if I had mentioned a minor etiquette breach. "That was paperwork. Julia, it was a formality to protect the assets from tax exposure. We were trying to preserve the estate for you, for your future." She reached into her purse. "We want to make it right," she said. "We know you are struggling. We know you lost your job. I didn't lose it, I said sharply. I was suspended because you lied to my employer. She ignored that. She pulled out a blue folder. We have drawn up a settlement, she said. A private family arrangement. We want to give you the money. Julia, not through the trust. That is too complicated now with the legal filings. But a direct gift. From us to you. She opened the folder and handed it to me. There was a check stapled to the front page. I looked at the number. $500,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to start over. But it wasn't the millions that were in the Charlotte Wynn Trust. I looked at my mother. She was watching me closely, her eyes tracing my face, waiting for the relief, the gratitude. Just sign the agreement, she said softly, and it is all yours. We can put this behind us. We can be a family again. No more auditors, no more lawyers, just us. I felt a tug in my chest. God, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take the check and the apology and go back to being their daughter. I wanted the war to be over. I looked at the document attached to the check. Settlement agreement and mutual release. I started reading. The first page was standard legalese. Parties agree to cease all litigation. Confidentiality. Then I turned to page 3. Clause 7. Admission of facts. The beneficiary, Julia Henderson, acknowledges that during the period of 2020 through 2026, she experienced episodes of emotional volatility and financial instability that necessitated family intervention. She agrees that the estrangement filed on January 28, 2026, was a mutual decision based on these personal challenges. I stopped reading. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I looked up at my mother. You want me to sign this? I said. Yes, she said, smiling and encouraging. Brittle smile. It is just standard language. Honey, to protect everyone. It is not standard. Mom, I said, my voice shaking with quiet rage. It is a confession. I tapped the paper. If I sign this, I am admitting that I am unstable. I am admitting that the estrangement was valid. So? She asked, her smile faltering. It is just words. Julia, the money is real. If I sign this, I said, realizing the trap, this document becomes the proof you need to permanently disqualify me from the trust. The trust pays out millions. You are offering me $500,000 to sign away my claim to the rest of it. You are using my own signature to lock the door you forged. I ripped the check off the document. I held it up. You think I am this stupid? I asked. Julia. No, she stammered. It is not like that. It is exactly like that, I said, my voice rising. You came into my home, pretending to care, pretending to offer an olive branch, and you brought a bear trap. I tore the check in half, then in half again. I threw the pieces on the floor between us. Get out, I said. My mother stared at the confetti of paper on the rug. Her face changed. The pity vanished. The anger vanished. What was left was naked fear. Her lip trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. Real tears this time. Julia, please, she whispered. You do not understand. We don't have the money. I stopped. What? The trust, she said, her voice cracking. It is gone. It is all gone. I stared at her. What do you mean? It is gone. The markets. She wept. The bad loans. Your father. He tried to fix it. He tried to double down to make it back, but it just kept disappearing. She took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. If the audit continues, Julia, if they look at the real accounts, they are going to see that the cupboard is bare. Graham will go to jail. Your father will go to jail. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. She was shaking. This $500,000 was all we could scrape together. She said, it is the last of the liquidity. We borrowed against the life insurance to get it. Please, just take it. Sign the paper. Let us claim the estrangement so the auditors stop looking. If the trust is void, they won't audit the trust accounts. They will just look at the foundation. We can survive the foundation audit. We can fix that. but we cannot survive the trust audit. I looked at the woman who had raised me. She wasn't a villain in that moment. She was a desperate, drowning woman trying to pull me under with her. She wasn't protecting a secret fortune. She was protecting a crater. They had stolen my inheritance not to get rich, but to stay afloat. They had burned my future to keep the lights on in a mansion they couldn't afford. I felt a profound, crushing sadness. I cannot help you. Mom, I said softly. Julia. She begged. I cannot sign a lie to save you from the truth. I said, I won't do it. I opened the door. Please leave. She looked at me for a long moment. The fear in her eyes hardened into something dead and cold. She realized I wasn't going to throw her a line. You are just like your grandmother. She spat, wiping her face. Cold. She walked out. I locked the door. I leaned my forehead against the wood and breathed. The next morning, I went to the offices of the audit firm. Mara came with me. We sat in a conference room with glass walls that overlooked the city skyline. Simon Vance sat across from us, flanked by 2 junior associates who typed everything I said. This is a sworn statement, Simon said, pushing a recorder to the center of the table. Anything you say can be used in the final report to the board and potentially in criminal proceedings. Do you understand? I understand. I said, tell us about the notification you received regarding the trust. Simon said, I took a sip of water. The temptation to scream, to cry, to tell them about my mother begging in my living room was overwhelming. It would be so satisfying to paint the emotional picture. But I remembered Mara's advice. Emotions are dismissible. Facts are sticky. I kept it surgical. I received no formal notification. I said, I became aware of the trust's existence only after discovering documents in a storage unit rented by my father. I slid the photocopy of the forged waiver across the table. This document, dated September 12, 2008, purports to be my waiver of beneficiary status. Simon picked it up. He looked at the signature. And this is not your signature? It is a forgery. I said, I have provided handwriting samples from that year for comparison. Furthermore, the notary stamp belongs to Elias Thorne, whose license was revoked in 2006. Simon looked at the junior associates. Note that, he said, invalid notarization. We went through the bank records. I pointed out the dates, the amounts, the names of the shell companies. I didn't say, my father is a thief, I said. On January 4th, 2020, $200,000 was transferred to a verified shell entity controlled by Robert Henderson. I spoke for 3 hours. By the end, my voice was raspy. When we finished, Simon turned off the recorder. You have given us a lot, Ms. Henderson, he said. But there is a missing piece. What? I asked. The liquidity. Simon said, we have traced the outflows. Millions went out over the years. But we also see inflows, large ones. Just last week. Last week? I asked. 3 days before your birthday. Simon said, a transfer of $4 million was initiated from the foundation's investment portfolio into a new entity. I looked at Mara. My mother had said the money was gone. She said the cupboard was bare. Who controls the new entity? Mara asked. That is the problem. Simon said, it is an offshore LLC, Aurora Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. We cannot see the beneficial owner, but the transfer was authorized by Graham Sutter. If that money moved 3 days before my birthday, I said, thinking aloud, they were hiding it. They knew the audit might happen. They were moving the last of the assets out of reach. I went back to Mara's office. We started hunting for Aurora Holdings. It took us 4 hours of digging through international registries. Finally, Mara found a link in the relentless tangled web of corporate filings. Aurora Holdings wasn't owned by my father. It wasn't owned by Graham Sutter. It was registered to a registered agent in Georgetown. But the billing address for the annual maintenance fees? It was a P.O. box in Briarcliff Harbor. I know that box, I said, staring at the screen. How? Mara asked. I used to pick up mail there for my dad when I was in high school. I said, he said it was for his consulting work. We pulled the ownership records for the PEO box. It wasn't my father's name. It was S. Klein, Samuel Klein, the attorney. My mother had lied. Or maybe she didn't know. She thought the money was gone. She thought they were destitute, but they weren't. My father and Klein hadn't just stolen the money from me. They were stealing it from the foundation and hiding it from my mother. They had moved the last $4 million into a lifeboat that only they could access. The scheme stretched wider than just a desperate family trying to save their home. This was a calculated exit strategy. They were going to let the foundation crash, let the family take the fall, and retire on my inheritance in the Caymans. My phone buzzed. It was Lena. "I am downstairs." The text read, "I have something." I ran down to the lobby. Lena was standing by the security desk, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. She looked terrified. She handed me a small silver flash drive. "What is this?" I asked. "I stole it," she whispered. "From Dad's desk. He left his laptop open." She looked around to make sure no one was watching. "It is his emails with Klein, from the last month." She gripped my arm. "Julia, it is worse than the money." I went back upstairs. Mara and I plugged in the drive. We opened the folder marked Inbox. I started reading. The emails were a conversation between two men discussing the destruction of a human being as if they were planning a renovation. From S. Klein to R. Henderson at January 20th, 2026. Bob, regarding the birthday dinner, the legal filing for estrangement is weak if we rely solely on past conduct. We need a triggering event, something recent, something public. From R. Henderson to S. Klein. Date, January 20th, 2026. I know. That is why we are doing the toast. I'm going to push her. I'm going to use the disappointment angle. She has always been sensitive about my approval. If I humiliate her enough, she will snap. She will scream. She will cause a scene. From S. Klein to R. Henderson. Date, January 21st, 2026. Make sure she is drinking. Keep refilling her glass. We need her to look intoxicated. If she throws a drink or yells, we have the witnesses. Graham and Peter will testify that she was belligerent. Then we file the emergency motion for mental incapacity the next morning. We paint her as dangerous. That blocks the trust payout immediately. I sat back in the chair. My hands were trembling. I remembered my mother telling the waiters to watch my wine intake. You know how flushed you get. It wasn't concern. It was a setup. They wanted me drunk. They wanted me screaming. They wanted me to be the crazy ex-daughter so they could legally justify robbing me. I read the next email from R. Henderson. Klein. Date, January 22nd, 2026. It will work. She is weak. She craves affection. When I cut her off, she will fall apart. We just need to capture the fallout. I stared at the words. She is weak. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my dignity. They wanted to break me in front of 60 people so they could use the pieces to build their golden parachute. The cruelty was the point. The cruelty was the mechanism. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. They were wrong. I whispered. Mara looked at me. What? They thought I was weak. I said, they thought I would scream. They thought I would beg. I looked at the email again, but I didn't scream. I took the microphone. I stood up. The shaking in my hands stopped. They bet everything on me being the version of myself they created. I said, the insecure little girl who needed Daddy's approval. But that girl didn't show up to the party. I looked at Mara. I am done investigating. I have the proof. I have the motive. I have the money trail. What do we do? Mara asked. We finish it. I said. I went home that night. The apartment was quiet. The confetti of my mother's check was still on the rug. I vacuumed it up. I checked my mail. There was a heavy, cream-colored envelope in the stack. I opened it. It was an invitation. The board of directors of the Halston Family Foundation cordially invites you to the annual Winter Gala, honoring Robert and Eleanor Henderson. For 30 years of community integrity and philanthropic excellence. Saturday, February 1st, 7 o'clock in the evening, The Grand Ballroom, Briarcliff Hotel. I stared at the card. The calligraphy was elegant. The gold foil shimmered under the kitchen light. Community integrity. They were going to stand on a stage. They were going to accept an award. They were going to smile and wave and be celebrated as the pillars of the community. While the stolen $4 million sat in a Cayman account and their daughter was painted as a lunatic, this was their endgame. They needed this gala. They needed the applause to drown out the rumors. If they got that award, if they solidified their reputation one last time, they could survive the audit. They could claim the investigation was just a formality. They planned to seal the narrative forever on Saturday night. I looked at the RSVP card. Accepts with pleasure. Declines with regret. I picked up a pen. I checked the box. Accepts with pleasure. I wasn't going to decline. I wasn't going to hide. They wanted a show? They wanted a public moment? I would give them one, but it wouldn't be the one they wrote. I walked to my closet. I pushed aside the work clothes, the sensible blazers. I found the dress I had bought 5 years ago for a wedding I never attended. It was red, not a polite, dark burgundy. It was a bright, violent scarlet. I held it up against myself in the mirror. It was the color of a warning flag. I am coming. I whispered to the reflection, and I am bringing the receipts. The grand ballroom of the Briarcliff Hotel was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, designed to make people feel small and expensive. It was 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the low, murmuring hum of 300 wealthy people congratulating each other on being wealthy. I stood at the entrance, just outside the heavy double doors. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. It was scarlet red, a violent slash of color against the sea of black tuxedos and navy gowns inside. Beside me stood Mara Klein. She was wearing a sharp black suit, holding a clutch that contained not lipstick, but a notarized affidavit and a chain of custody report for a flash drive. And behind us, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo he had clearly rented, was Simon Vance, the auditor. He wasn't there as a guest. He was there as a witness. "Are you ready?" Mara asked softly. I looked through the sliver of glass in the doors. I could see the head table. My parents were there. My father was laughing at something the mayor was saying, his hand resting casually on the white tablecloth. My mother was nodding, her smile fixed and radiant. They looked untouchable. They looked like the victims of a tragedy who had bravely chosen to carry on. "I am ready," I said. We pushed the doors open. We didn't announce ourselves. We just walked in. The room was loud, filled with the clatter of silverware and the jazz band playing on the stage. But as we moved toward table 19, a table in the back that Mara had secured through a third party, the noise began to ripple and change. It started with the people nearest the door. They saw the red dress. They saw the face of the daughter, who was supposed to be in a mental health crisis. They saw the calm, focused expression that didn't match the rumors of hysteria. Heads turned. Whispers jumped from table to table like static electricity. "Is that her? I thought she was in a facility. Who is that with her?" I kept my eyes forward. I didn't look at my former friends. I didn't look at the relatives who had blocked my number. I walked with the cadence of a soldier marching to a drum only I could hear. We reached our table. We sat. Simon Vance placed a thin file folder on the table next to his water glass. It was the only object on the table that wasn't silver or china. Up at the head table, the movement caught my father's eye. He stopped laughing. He squinted into the dim light of the ballroom. Then he saw me. For a second, his face went slack. It wasn't anger. It was shock. He looked at Graham Sutter, who was sitting 2 seats away. Graham followed his gaze. Graham's face went pale, draining of color so fast he looked like a wax figure. My mother saw me last. She put her hand to her throat, touching her diamond necklace as if checking to make sure it was still there. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just poured myself a glass of water and took a sip. They couldn't throw me out. Not now. Not with the mayor sitting next to them and the biggest donors in the state watching. To make a scene now would be to admit there was a scene to be made. They had to play the game. The dinner service began. It was agonizingly slow. I ate nothing. I watched them. I watched my father whisper frantically to Attorney Klein, who had suddenly lost his appetite. I watched Graham Sutter down 3 glasses of wine in 20 minutes. They were sweating. They knew I knew, but they didn't know what I was going to do. Finally, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The chairman of the board, a retired judge named Harrison, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "tonight is a special night. We are here to honor 2 pillars of Briarcliff, 2 people who have given their time, their resources, and their hearts to this foundation for 3 decades. The applause was polite, practiced. Please welcome Robert and Eleanor Henderson." My parents stood up. They walked to the stage. They held hands. They looked every inch the noble sufferers. My father took the microphone. He waited for the applause to die down. He looked out at the room, scanning the darkness until he found table 19. He locked eyes with me. "Thank you, Judge Harrison," he said. His voice was warm, rich with false humility. "This award means everything to us, especially this year." He paused. He looked down at his shoes, then back up, bravely. "As many of you know, this has been a year of profound personal challenge for our family. We have had to make difficult choices. We have had to learn that sometimes love means letting go." A sympathetic murmur rippled through the room. "We live in a world that often rewards chaos," my father continued, his voice gaining strength. "But we believe in order, we believe in integrity, and sometimes, to protect the legacy of a family, you have to prune the branches that have become toxic." I felt a physical blow in my chest. Toxic. He was standing in front of 300 people, calling his daughter a disease that had to be cut out. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands started to sweat. This was the moment I was supposed to break. This was the moment I was supposed to run out of the room crying, proving his point. But I looked at the file folder on the table. Pruning the branches. He wasn't talking about morality. He was talking about the beneficiary list. "We do this for the future," my father said. "We do this for the community. Thank you for standing by us." He stepped back. The applause was thunderous. My mother wiped a delicate tear from her cheek. Judge Harrison took the mic back. "Thank you, Robert. Inspiring words. Now, as is our tradition, we have a few minutes for questions from our shareholders and community partners before dessert is served." This was it. The QA segment. It was usually a formality. People asked about the scholarship fund or the new wing of the hospital. I waited. A man in the front row asked about the timeline for the new library. My father answered smoothly. A woman asked about the upcoming charity run. My mother answered with a smile. Then there was a lull. "Any other questions?" Judge Harrison asked. I stood up. The scraping of my chair against the floor sounded like a gunshot. The room went silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. I walked toward the center aisle. I saw a microphone stand set up for the audience. My father froze on stage. His smile turned into a rictus of panic. He looked at the security guards by the door, signaling them with his eyes. "Get her out." But I was already at the mic. I gripped the stand. My hands were steady. "Judge Harrison," I said. My voice was clear. It didn't shake. "I have a question regarding the financial report." Judge Harrison looked confused. He looked at my father. "Ms. Henderson," he said nervously, "this is a celebration. Perhaps technical questions are better suited for the boardroom." "I think this is the perfect place," I said. "Since we are talking about integrity." I looked directly at Graham Sutter, who was sitting on the stage next to my parents. "Mr. Sutter," I said, "can you explain to the donors in this room why the foundation authorized a wire transfer of $4 million on January 25th to an entity called Aurora Holdings?" Graham Sutter stood up. He knocked over his water glass. "This is inappropriate," he shouted. His voice was high and thready. "This is a private family matter." "It is not a family matter," I said, keeping my voice level. "It is a question of governance. Aurora Holdings is an offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The mailing address for the controlling interest is a post office box in Briarcliff, listed to Samuel Klein. A gasp went through the room. People turned to look at Samuel Klein at table 4. He was staring at his plate, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "That is a lie!" my father roared. He stepped toward the edge of the stage. He pointed a finger at me. "You are sick. Julia, you are off your medication. Security, remove her." 2 security guards started walking toward me. I didn't move. I looked at table 19. "Mr. Vance?" I said. Simon Vance stood up. He didn't look like a party guest. He looked like an executioner. He picked up the file folder. "I am Simon Vance," he announced. His voice carried without a microphone. "Lead auditor for the firm of Vance Associates." The security guards stopped. "You don't tackle the auditor. I am currently conducting a forensic review of the Foundation's ledgers," Simon said. He looked up at the board members on stage. "I can confirm that the transaction Ms. Henderson cited is real. $4 million was moved to an unverified offshore account 3 days ago." He opened the folder. "I can also confirm that since 2018, over $3 million in loans have been secured using restricted endowment assets as collateral. These loans appear to benefit the personal accounts of Robert and Eleanor Henderson." The room exploded. It wasn't applause this time. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they were witnessing a felony. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. On stage, the color drained from Judge Harrison's face. He looked at my father with horror. "Robert?" he asked. "What is this?" My father ignored him. He jumped down from the stage. He walked toward me. He wasn't the polished philanthropist anymore. He was a cornered animal. His face was red, his eyes bulging. He stopped 2 feet away from me. "You ungrateful little traitor," he hissed. The microphone picked it up. It echoed through the speakers. A harsh, ugly sound. "We gave you everything. We protected you. And you do this? You humiliate us?" I looked him in the eye. I didn't step back. "You didn't protect me," I said into the mic. "You robbed me. You are insane," he shouted, playing his last card. "You are mentally unstable. We have the filings. We disowned you because you are sick. I was disowned to keep me quiet," I said. My voice boomed through the ballroom, drowning him out. "I was disowned because the Charlotte Wind Trust was about to trigger, and you needed to steal the principal to pay off your debts." "Lies," he screamed. "She signed it away. She signed the waiver in 2008. He froze. He realized what he had said. The room went deadly quiet again. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. 2008. I repeated. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the glossy photocopy of the waiver. I held it up. I was 12 years old in 2008. "Dad," I turned to the audience. I held the paper high. "This is a document my father filed with the county. It claims that a 12-year-old girl voluntarily declined a multi-million-dollar trust fund." I looked at the board members. Does that sound like something a 12-year-old would do? Or does it sound like forgery? My father lunged for the paper. I pulled it back. "And one more thing," I said. "The notary stamp on this document belongs to Elias Thorne." I looked at Judge Harrison. "Judge, you might remember Elias Thorne. You presided over his disbarment hearing in 2006. Judge Harrison stood up slowly. His face was gray. "Elias Thorne lost his license 2 years before this document was signed," he said. His voice was shaking. I dropped the paper on the floor at my father's feet. "It is a fake," I said. "The waiver is fake. The estrangement is fake. The only thing that is real is the $4 million you stole." I looked at my mother on the stage. She was sitting in her chair, weeping. Not for the cameras, for the end of her life. "I am done cooperating with my own erasure," I said. I placed the microphone back in the stand. I turned around. The room parted for me. People backed away, not out of fear, but out of awe. They looked from me to the stage, where the board members were huddled in an emergency recess, where Graham Sutter was trying to sneak out the side door, where my father stood alone in the center aisle, breathing hard, staring at the ruin of his reputation. I walked past Mara. She nodded. "We are done here," she said. I walked past Simon Vance. He was already on the phone, presumably calling the authorities. I walked out the double doors. I walked through the lobby, past the confused valet, and out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap. It was freezing, but I was burning up. The adrenaline was crashing. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against a stone pillar, gasping for air, shaking. I had done it. I had burned it down. The silence of the night was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of sirens approaching. Then I heard the click of heels behind me. I turned. It was Lena. She was still wearing her gala dress, a pale pink gown that looked ridiculous in the harsh streetlights. Her face was streaked with mascara. She was shivering. She stopped a few feet away from me. She looked at the hotel, where the chaos was still unfolding. Then she looked at me. She didn't look like the golden child anymore. She looked like a refugee. "You did it," she whispered. "I did." I said, "Is it over?" she asked. I listened to the sirens getting louder. "No," I said. "The lawyers, the trials, the bankruptcy. That is just starting." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. Mom looked at me before I ran out. She said, her voice trembling. She looked like she didn't know who I was. She never knew who we were. "Lena," I said, "she only knew what we were worth." Lena nodded slowly. She took a step closer to me. She looked terrified, but she wasn't running back inside. She was standing in the cold with me. She looked at the empty street ahead of us. "So," she said, "what happens now?" I looked at my sister. I looked at the road. For the first time in 30 years, there was no script. There was no trust fund waiting to save us. There was no reputation to uphold. There was just the truth, and the cold air, and the terrifying, beautiful blank page of the rest of our lives. I took a deep breath. "Now," I said, "we find out who we actually are." Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey into the dark heart of a family that chose gold over blood, and I hope Julia's victory resonated with you. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, karma, and the truth coming to light. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments below. Until next time.